A nun kneels quietly in prayer at a small church in Montana, 1899. The peaceful scene is shattered when three armed men burst through the doors, their boots echoing against worn wooden floors. They're searching for someone, a woman who's been causing trouble for their operation. The sister remains still, her rosary beads clicking softly between her fingers. One of the men grabs her shoulder roughly, spinning her around. She looks up at him with calm eyes, those of a predator rather than prey. What happens next will become a legend in these parts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sister Margaret stood at the window of her train compartment, watching the Montana wilderness roll past in endless waves of autumn gold. The setting sun painted long shadows across the valley, reminding her of another sunset 6 months ago in Paris, the last operation before she'd walked away from everything. Her hand unconsciously touched the silver cross hanging at her neck, fingers tracing the worn edges that concealed a thin blade within. The year was 1899, and the world was changing. The wild frontier was giving way to civilization, but pockets of lawlessness still thrived in places like Dead Creek, Montana. Her destination. The small mining town had sent out a desperate plea for help, establishing a school for local children. The church had answered by sending Sister Margaret. What the town didn't know was that she'd volunteered specifically for this assignment. The train whistle pierced the evening air as they approached Dead Creek Station. Margaret gathered her modest belongings, a weathered carpet bag containing her spare habit, some books, and carefully hidden beneath false stitching, the tools of her former trade. 10 years in British intelligence had taught her to always be prepared. As she stepped onto the platform, the station master hurried over, wringing his hands. "Sister Margaret, we weren't expecting you until next week's train." His eyes darted nervously around the nearly empty platform. "God's work waits for no one, Mr. Jenkins, ma'am. Thomas Jenkins." He grabbed her bag before she could protest. "The thing is, sister, we've had some trouble lately. The sheriff was hoping to meet your train personally." Margaret noticed 3 men watching from the shadows of the station house, their stance and the way they carried their guns marking them as professionals rather than common thugs. One of them, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard, whispered something to his companions. "What kind of trouble, Mr. Jenkins?" she asked, though she already knew. The real reason she'd chosen Dead Creek was currently locked in a safe in the back room of the town bank, evidence that could bring down one of the largest criminal enterprises in the American West. "Nothing for you to worry about, sister." Jenkins quickened his pace. "Just some disagreements about the new mining claims. I'll have my boy drive you to the church." A young man appeared with a wagon, helping Margaret aboard. As they pulled away from the station, she caught snippets of conversation from the 3 men. Matches the description. "Can't be her. Keep watching." The wagon wound through Dead Creek's muddy streets. Margaret took in every detail, the positions of buildings, alternate routes, potential escape paths. Old habits die hard. The town was larger than she'd expected, with a main street lined by false-fronted buildings trying to appear more substantial than they were. Much like herself, she thought, with grim amusement. They passed the bank, where James Carlton, the corrupt bank manager, would be finishing his day's work. Carlton was the key to everything, the money laundering, the protection rackets, the murders, but she needed proof before she could act. The church sat on a small hill overlooking the town, its white-painted walls glowing in the last light of day. Beside it stood a modest building that would serve as both school and her living quarters. Perfect sightlines to the bank, she noted. "Will you be all right here alone, sister?" Jenkins' son asked as he carried her bag inside. "Town's not as peaceful as it used to be." Margaret smiled serenely. "The Lord watches over his flock, my child." She'd learned long ago that a nun's habit, was better camouflage than any disguise the intelligence service had ever given her. People saw what they expected to see, a gentle woman of God, not someone who could kill a man 15 different ways with her bare hands. That night, as she knelt in prayer at the small altar, the church door creaked open. Heavy footsteps approached, but Margaret didn't turn around. She heard the metallic click of a gun being cocked. "Stand up slowly, sister," a gruff voice commanded. "We need to have a conversation about why you're really here." Margaret's fingers tightened around her rosary. Each bead was filled with lead, making it a deadly weapon in the right hands. Her hands, but violence in a house of God would draw too much attention. She needed to play this carefully. "I'm here to teach the children," she said softly, rising and turning to face 3 men, the same ones from the station. The leader, the silver-bearded man, held a Colt revolver pointed at her chest. "That's a touching story," he sneered. "But we know better. The real Sister Margaret is currently enjoying an extended stay in a Denver hospital with 2 broken legs. Strange coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Margaret's mind raced. Her cover was blown faster than expected. She needed to adapt to survive, just like Paris, just like Shanghai, just like all the other times she'd faced death and emerged victorious. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she replied calmly, noting the positions of all 3 men, calculating angles and planning moves. The leader stood 12 feet away, too far to disarm before his companions could react. The others flanked her 5 feet to either side. The silver-bearded man laughed. "Indeed he does, sister. Indeed he does. Now, why don't you tell us who you really are? And what's in that carpet bag of yours?" Through the window, Margaret saw movement in the shadows outside. More men surrounded the church. They'd come prepared for trouble. Good. So had she. "Carlton sent you, didn't he?" The leader's grip tightened on his gun. "He's getting nervous about our arrangement." Margaret spotted a 4th man through the window, positioning himself near the back door. They'd studied the building's layout. Professional work. She silently thanked her old handler Morris for insisting she memorize the blueprints of every church in Dead Creek before arriving. "I don't know any Carlton," she replied, letting a trace of fear enter her voice. "Time to play the frightened nun. Please, I'm just here to teach. The children need enough." The man to her right stepped closer. "Boss, we should just end this now. No witnesses, no problems." The leader shook his head. "Not yet, Turner. First, we find out what she knows." He moved forward, keeping his gun trained on her. "Last chance, sister. The truth, or things get unpleasant." Margaret let her rosary slip slightly through her fingers, counting the beads. 3 more to the weighted end, perfect for what she needed. Outside, a dog barked, momentarily drawing the attention of the man by the window. "Very well," she sighed. "The truth is..." In one fluid motion, she swung the rosary, its weighted end catching the nearest man's temple with a sickening crack. Before his body hit the floor, she was moving. The leader's gun roared, the bullet splintering the altar where she'd been standing a split second before. Margaret rolled behind a pew as more shots filled the church. Wood exploded around her as she crawled forward, staying low. "Find her!" the leader bellowed. "Watch the doors." Margaret smiled in the darkness. They were looking for escape routes. They still didn't understand who they were dealing with. The 4th man burst through the back door, providing the distraction she needed. She surged upward, vaulting over the pew. Her hand found Turner's wrist, twisting until his gun clattered to the floor. His cry of pain was cut short as her knee found his solar plexus. Using his falling body as a shield, she spun him toward the leader. 2 more. Shots rang out, both hitting Turner. Margaret had already moved, diving behind a stone pillar. The leader was good. He'd recognized his man was already lost and took the shots anyway. This wasn't his first kill. "You've had training," he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Military? No, something else. Who do you work for?" Margaret's response was to send a hymnal flying from behind the pillar. As the leader instinctively tracked its movement, she sprinted to another position. The fourth man's shot went wide, hitting the pillar where she'd been. "It doesn't matter who I work for," she said, her voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. Another trick learned in Paris. "What matters is that in about 30 seconds you'll all be dead or praying for death." A laugh, but she heard the uncertainty in it. Big words from a woman in a habit. "Would you prefer I changed into something more appropriate for the occasion?" Her hand found the small blade concealed in her cross. "Though I've found God's servants can be quite efficient when necessary," the leader growled in frustration. "Smoke her out." But Margaret was already moving. The fourth man's attempt to flank her position brought him exactly where she wanted him. Her blade found his throat with surgical precision. A silent kill. One more down. The leader and his remaining man fired at the sound of the body falling, but Margaret was elsewhere, using the techniques that had kept her alive through a decade of impossible missions. The darkness was her ally, the church's architecture her weapon. "Boss," the last man's voice shook, "this ain't right. She ain't natural." A mistake born of fear. His voice had given away his position. Margaret moved like a shadow through the darkness, closing the distance. The leader sensed the attack coming and spun, but too late. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weighted rosary wrapped around his gun hand, crushing fingers. As he screamed, Margaret's elbow found his temple. He crumpled, unconscious or dead. She didn't pause to check. The last man broke, running for the door. Margaret's thrown blade caught him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. She was on him in an instant, pressing a knee into his back. "Who else knows about me?" she demanded, applying pressure to the wound. "Everyone," he gasped. "Carlton's got eyes everywhere. They'll come for you." Margaret heard horses approaching. The gunshots had drawn attention just as she'd planned. By the time help arrived, they'd found a terrified nun who'd barely escaped with her life, and 4 unconscious men who'd mysteriously survived their own shootout. She knocked the man unconscious and quickly began arranging the scene. As she dragged the bodies into position, she allowed herself a grim smile. Carlton would get her message. The hunter had become the hunted. The church doors burst open, revealing Sheriff Mills and several deputies. Margaret was already on her knees, trembling. "Sister, are you hurt?" Mills rushed to her side. "The Lord protected me," she whispered, making the sign of the cross. "Though I fear these men may need a doctor." As the deputies secured the scene, Margaret's mind was already moving to the next phase of her mission. Carlton would be rattled now, likely to make mistakes. All she needed was access to that safe, and Dead Creek's criminal empire would crumble. But first, she had children to teach. After all, she hadn't entirely been lying about that part of her mission. The morning after the church incident dawned cold and grey over Dead Creek. Sister Margaret sat at her small desk, carefully writing in a leather-bound journal. To any observer, it appeared to be a prayer diary. In reality, each carefully coded entry contained intelligence about Carlton's operation. 4 men, professional training, European ammunition in their weapons, she wrote, disguising the words within biblical verses. Carlton's reach extends beyond local muscle. A knock at the door interrupted her writing. Sheriff Mills stood outside, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Sister, might I have a word?" Margaret quickly finished her coded passage with a prayer for guidance. "Of course, Sheriff. Please come in." Mills entered, his boots leaving muddy prints on the wooden floor. He was younger than most sheriffs she'd encountered, maybe mid-30s, with intelligent eyes that suggested he wasn't as simple as he pretended to be. "Found something interesting about our visitors from last night," he said, producing a telegram. 2 of them were former Pinkerton agents. The other 2, well, let's just say they've got interesting friends in Chicago. Margaret crossed herself, playing the concerned nun. Merciful Father, why would such men target our humble church? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Mills studied her face. Strange coincidence. Them showing up the same day as you. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Yes, you mentioned that last night. Mills leaned against the wall. Here's another mystery. That simple fall that put the real Sister Margaret in a Denver hospital happened right after she visited Carlton's bank. Margaret felt her muscles tense, ready for action, but kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure I understand, Sheriff. No? He moved to the window, looking out at the schoolyard where children were starting to gather. 3 years ago, I was a Pinkerton myself. Worked a case involving a British operative, a woman who could move like a ghost and fight like 10 men. Never saw her face, but I saw what she could do. He turned back to Margaret. Sound familiar? The air between them crackled with tension. Margaret weighed her options. Mills could be a valuable ally or a dangerous enemy. The children will be here soon, she said softly. What is it you want, Sheriff? Truth would be nice, but I'll settle for knowing whose side you're on. I serve God and justice in that order. Mills nodded slowly. Carlton's been bleeding this. Town dry for years. Good people disappear if they ask too many questions. Local law enforcement's been bought or scared into silence. Then suddenly, a mysterious nun shows up, and Carlton's men start getting nervous. Perhaps they lack faith, Margaret suggested. A small smile crossed Mills's face. Perhaps. Just remember, Sister, whatever game you're playing, there are innocent people caught in the middle. Those children out there, most of their parents work at Carlton's mines. If anything happens to him, the children are precisely why I'm here, Sheriff. Margaret stood, straightening her habit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare. Mills put his hat back on. Just be careful. Carlton didn't get where he is by being careless. And Sister, he paused at the door. If you need help, all you have to do is ask. Some of us still believe in justice, even out here. After he left, Margaret added a new entry to her journal. Sheriff Mills, potential ally, former Pinkerton, knows more than he should. The school bell rang and Margaret tucked the journal away in its hidden compartment. Time to become the devoted teacher these children needed. The morning passed in a blur of reading lessons and arithmetic. Margaret found herself surprisingly engaged in the role of teacher. These children, with their eager faces and quick minds, reminded her of why she'd chosen this path of redemption. During the lunch break, she noticed a girl sitting alone, watching the other children play. Lucy Carlton, the bank manager's daughter, 10 years old, with serious eyes that had seen too much. Would you like to join the others? Margaret asked, sitting beside her. Lucy shook her head. Father says I shouldn't mix too much with them. Says we're different. Different how? Better. Lucy's voice was small. But I don't feel better, especially not since... She stopped abruptly. Since what? Nothing. I shouldn't talk about it. Father gets angry when I talk about Mother. Margaret kept her voice gentle. What happened to your mother, Lucy? Father says she left, but I heard her screaming that night, and then the men came and... Lucy's eyes filled with tears. I'm not supposed to know about the cellar. Margaret's heart raced. The cellar. Could it be where Carlton kept his records? What cellar, Lucy? But Lucy was already shutting down, fear replacing grief. I have to go. Please don't tell Father I said anything. She ran off, leaving Margaret with a new piece of the puzzle and a growing sense of urgency. If Carlton was willing to silence his own wife, the afternoon brought more visitors. 2 men in expensive suits, claiming to be school board officials. Margaret recognized their type immediately. Hired guns, trying to pass as businessmen. They asked pointed questions about her background, her training, her references. Margaret answered each query with practiced ease, watching their growing frustration. Finally, one of them leaned forward, dropping the pretense. "Look, sister, let's be direct. Mr. Carlton is a generous man. The church could benefit from his generosity, new books, better facilities. All he asks is that certain matters remain private." "All matters between a man and his God are private," Margaret replied serenely. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have papers to grade." They left, but their message was clear. Carlton was escalating. That evening, as Margaret prepared for night prayers, she heard soft footsteps in the church. Her hand went to the blade in her cross, but it was only Lucy, looking terrified. "Sister Margaret, I found something. In Father's study." She held out a leather ledger. "I think it's important, but if he finds out I took it—" Margaret examined the book. Account numbers, dates, large sums of money, names she recognized from intelligence reports. This was exactly what she needed, proof of Carlton's entire operation. "Lucy, listen carefully. Did anyone see you take this?" The girl shook her head. "Father's hosting a dinner party. That's why I could—" "But sister, there's something else. I heard them talking about you. They're going to—" Gunshots shattered the evening calm. Margaret grabbed Lucy and dove behind the altar as bullets splintered the pews. Carlton's men had followed the girl. "Stay down," Margaret whispered, pulling her blade free. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, remember, God protects his children." She reached for her rosary, ready to become the weapon she'd spent years trying to leave behind. But this time, she wasn't fighting for Queen and country. She was fighting for an innocent child, for justice, for redemption. The church doors burst open as Carlton himself strode in, flanked by armed men. "Lucy! Come out now!" Margaret squeezed the girl's hand. "Do you trust me?" Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Then pray, child, pray hard, because what happens next will require all the faith we can muster." Carlton's voice echoed through the church. "Lucy, this isn't a game. You've taken something that doesn't belong to you." Margaret assessed their situation. 5 armed men spread out through the pews, moving methodically. Carlton himself carried a silver-plated revolver, a man's vanity revealing his inexperience. With real violence, the ledger pressed against her side, heavy with secrets that could destroy him. "Sister," Lucy whispered, "there's another way out. Through the confessional." Margaret's mind raced back to the blueprints. Yes, an old priest's passage, probably forgotten by most. "Show me." They crawled silently behind the altar as Carlton's men searched the front of the church. The confessional wooden panels concealed a narrow door, rusted with age, but still functional. Margaret helped Lucy through first, then squeezed in behind, her pulling the ledger close. The passage was tight, thick with cobwebs and the musty smell of forgotten years. Lucy led the way, her small hands finding holds in the darkness. Behind them, shouts erupted as their escape was discovered. "It's been too long since your last confession, Mr. Carlton," Margaret called out, her voice bouncing off stone walls. "Perhaps it's time to unburden your soul." Gunshots answered her, bullets embedding themselves in ancient wood. The passage opened into the cemetery behind the church. Moonlight spilled across weathered headstones as Margaret helped Lucy emerge. But Carlton's men had anticipated this. 2 figures waited among the graves, guns drawn. "Quite a pickle you've gotten yourself into, sister," came a familiar voice. Sheriff Mills stepped from behind a monument, his badge catching moonlight. "Or should I call you Agent Spencer?" Margaret's breath caught. That name, her real name, hadn't been spoken aloud in years. "You know this woman, Sheriff?" Carlton demanded, emerging from the church with his remaining men. "Catherine Spencer, British intelligence finest." Mills kept his gun trained on her. "Disappeared 3 years ago, after a mission went bad in Paris. Some say she had a crisis of conscience. Others say she stole something valuable. The truth's probably somewhere in between." Lucy looked up at Margaret, confusion and fear warring in her young face. "Sister, the truth," Margaret said slowly, "is that some sins can't be washed away, but they can be balanced by good works." She turned to Mills. "You said you believed in justice, Sheriff. Did you mean it?" "Enough of this," Carlton spat. "Kill them, both. The girl, too. She's been nothing but trouble since her mother." "My mother didn't leave, did she?" Lucy's voice rang out clear and strong. "You killed her because she found this." She pointed to the ledger. Carlton's face twisted with rage. He raised his gun. Several things happened at once. Margaret pushed Lucy behind a tombstone as shots rang out. But they weren't aimed at them. Mills had turned on Carlton's men, dropping two before they could react. Margaret's blade found another's throat as she rolled behind cover. "You betrayed me!" Carlton screamed at Mills, firing wildly. "No!" Mills grunted, taking a bullet in the shoulder but staying upright. "I served justice, like I swore to do." Margaret used the chaos to close distance with Carlton. He saw her coming, swung his silver revolver around. She was faster, the weighted rosary. Caught his gun hand, shattering bone. As he screamed, her knee found his stomach, driving him to the ground. "Lucy," Carlton gasped. "Baby, help Daddy." "I heard her screaming," Lucy said quietly. "In the cellar. I heard everything." The remaining gunmen fled into the night as Mills's deputies arrived, drawn by the gunfire. Margaret held Carlton down as they took him into custody. "The ledger," she told Mills. "It's all here. Every transaction, every murder, every corrupt official on his payroll." Mills nodded grimly. "Enough to hang him 10 times over." He looked at Lucy. "I'm sorry, child. No one should have to learn the truth this way." Lucy stood straighter, older somehow in the moonlight. "Truth is truth, Sheriff. Sister Margaret taught us that." Later, as dawn broke over Dead Creek, Margaret sat with Lucy in the schoolroom. The girl hadn't slept, but her eyes were clear. "What happens now?" Lucy asked. "Your aunt in Denver, your mother's sister, she'll take care of you." Margaret squeezed her hand. "And I'll make sure Carlton can never hurt anyone again. Will you stay after it's done?" Margaret thought of her superiors in London, still hunting for their missing agent, of the evidence she'd stolen in Paris, proof of corruption that went far beyond Carlton, of the peace she'd found, unexpectedly, teaching in this small town. "I'll stay as long as I'm needed," she said. "After all, we still have lessons to complete." Lucy smiled for the first time since the night began. "Sister Margaret, or Catherine, or whoever you are, thank you." Margaret touched her cross, feeling the hidden blade within. Perhaps redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about using it to protect the future. Sheriff Mills appeared in the doorway, arm in a sling. "Sister, federal marshals are coming. They'll want to talk to you." "Let them come," Margaret said. "I have nothing left to hide, except perhaps for one small blade. After all, old habits die hard, and Dead Creek's children needed their teacher, all of their teachers, the nun, the spy, the protector." Lucy took her hand as the sun rose higher, painting the schoolroom in shades of gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats perhaps. But for now, in this moment, Margaret had found something she'd thought lost forever: purpose, and that, she reflected, was worth any price. Federal. Marshal Thomas Blackwood stood in the schoolroom, examining Lucy's drawings pinned to the wall. His weathered face revealed nothing, but Margaret recognized the calculated casualness of his posture. She'd perfected that same stance during countless interrogations. "Impressive work, sister," he said, tapping a child's arithmetic worksheet. "Though I suspect mathematics isn't your only expertise." 2 days had passed since Carlton's arrest. The town buzzed with rumors, each wilder than the last. Marshal Blackwood's arrival had sparked fresh speculation. God gives many gifts, Margaret replied, straightening the classroom's worn desks. Teaching is merely one of them. And killing 4 men in a church? Is that another gift? Self-defense is not murder, Marshal. She met his gaze steadily. Those men chose violence in a house of God. Blackwood smiled thinly. The London office sends their regards. Margaret's hand twitched toward her cross, but she stilled it. I left that life behind. Did you? Or did you just change battlefields? He produced a thick folder. Catherine Spencer, top agent, decorated twice for exceptional service. Then Paris happened. Ancient history. 3 years isn't ancient. Blackwood opened the folder. A corrupt banker. Evidence of high-level conspiracy. An agent who vanished with classified documents. Sound familiar? Margaret turned to the window. Children played in the schoolyard, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. Lucy sat among them now, slowly emerging from her shell. What do you want, Marshal? Carlton's ledger reveals something interesting. His operation wasn't just about money laundering and protection rackets. He was moving information, intelligence, about military installations, railway security, government contracts. Selling secrets to the highest bidder, Margaret nodded. Just like Guillaume in Paris. Exactly like Guillaume. Blackwood's voice hardened. The same banker you were investigating when you disappeared. The same man whose death caused an international incident. Margaret's mind flashed back to that night in Paris, the evidence she'd found, the terrible choice she'd faced, the sound of Guillaume's neck breaking as she'd made her decision. Guillaume was selling more than secrets, she said quietly. He was selling children, using his banking connections to traffic them across borders. The agency wanted to maintain surveillance, gather more intelligence. I chose to act instead, and took sensitive documents with you, insurance, names of his associates, proof of their crimes, because I knew what would happen. The agency would bury it all to avoid embarrassment, just like they buried the trafficking. Blackwood closed the folder. And now Carlton's ledger suggests the same network operates here, using frontier banks to move money and secrets, using mining operations as cover for something darker. The children, Margaret breathed. That's why he killed Lucy's mother. She discovered what was really happening in those mines. We've found 3 hidden chambers so far, evidence of prisoners being held there, but the operation's bigger than Carlton. We need to know everything. Margaret studied Blackwood's face. Why tell me this? Why not just arrest me? Because you were right in Paris. The agency cared more about intelligence than justice, but some of us remember our true purpose. He extended his hand. Help us finish what you started. Help us save those children. Before Margaret could respond, Sheriff Mills burst into the classroom. Sister, we've got trouble. Carlton escaped. Impossible, Blackwood snapped. He was under federal guard. Had help. Professional job. 2 guards dead. 3 wounded. And Mills hesitated. They took Lucy. Margaret's world narrowed to a single point of fury. When? Less than an hour ago. Heading east, toward the old Maxwell silver mine. She was moving before he finished speaking, habit and cross discarded on her desk. Beneath the modest dress, she wore close-fitting clothes, better suited for action. Sister, wait, Blackwood called. We need a plan. I have one. She withdrew a small case from her desk's hidden compartment. Inside lay the tools of her former trade, lockpicks, garrote wire, throwing knives. First, we save Lucy. Then we burn Carlton's entire operation to the ground. You can't just watch me. She armed herself with practiced efficiency. That girl trusted me. Carlton's already killed 1 person she loved. Mills checked his revolvers. I'm with you, sister. Maxwell Mine has a dozen entrances, but I know them all. Blackwood sighed heavily. The agency's not going to like this. The agency stopped being relevant the moment they took Lucy. Margaret's voice was ice. Coming, Marshal? He nodded slowly. God help anyone who stands in your way. God helps those who help themselves. she replied, leading them out into the morning sun. "And right now, he's going to help me send some very bad men to meet him personally." They rode hard toward the Maxwell mine, Margaret's mind racing through scenarios. Carlton was wounded, desperate. Taking Lucy was a mistake born of panic and rage. But he still had resources, connections. The mine would be well defended. "Carlton has to know we're coming," Mills said as they approached. "Place will be a fortress." "Good." Margaret checked her weapons. "That means they're all in one place, easier to deal with." "There's at least 20 armed men in there." Blackwood. "You warned. Then we should hurry before more arrive." They left the horses concealed behind a ridge. Margaret studied the mine's entrance through field glasses. Guards patrolled in pairs, professionally spaced. Gun emplacements covered likely approach. "Routes. Main entrance is a kill zone," she murmured. "Mills, you mentioned other ways in?" "Old ventilation shaft, about half a mile east. Comes out near the primary mining chamber." "Perfect. Marshal, how many men do you have nearby?" 24, an hour out. Have them seal off all escape routes. But wait for my signal before moving in. We need to find Lucy first." Margaret led them to the ventilation shaft. The descent would be treacherous, but she'd made worse climbs in her service years. "I go first," she said, securing a rope. 10 minutes, then follow. If you hear shooting, come faster." Mills grabbed her arm. "Sister, Catherine, whatever we find down there, we'll find Lucy alive." Her voice allowed no argument. "And then we'll make Carlton wish he wasn't." The shaft was narrow, decades of mining dust coating its walls. Margaret moved silently, years of training taking over. Near the bottom, voices echoed from the main chamber. "Can't just disappear," Carlton was saying. "The girl knows too much." "She's a child," another voice replied. "No one will believe her." Like no one believed her mother. "I won't make the same mistake twice." Margaret's blood boiled. She eased closer, staying in the shadows. The chamber was vast, mining equipment scattered about. Armed men guarded key positions. Carlton sat at a makeshift desk, his broken hand bandaged. Lucy was tied to a support beam, tears streaking her face. "The British agent complicates things," a well-dressed man said. Margaret recognized him from intelligence photos. Victor Cross, one of Guillaume's former associates. "If she has proof of the Paris operation, she won't live long enough to use it," Carlton sneered. "My men will deal with her when she comes for the girl." "Like they dealt with her in the church?" Cross snorted. "You underestimate her, Carlton. That's why you're a liability now." Margaret smiled grimly. Dissension in the ranks. She could use that. She heard Mills and Blackwood arriving above. Time to move. A knife found the nearest guard's throat. As he fell, she was already moving to the next target. Years of training, of violence and shadows, flowed through her like a dark symphony. Gunfire erupted as bodies were discovered. Margaret used the chaos to work closer to Lucy. Carlton was shouting orders, his men firing blindly at shadows. Mills and Blackwood joined the fight, their guns adding to the confusion. Margaret reached Lucy, sawing through her ropes. "I knew you'd." "And come," the girl whispered. "Always," Margaret replied. "Now close your eyes. What happens next isn't for children to see." Lucy buried her face in Margaret's shoulder as more men died. Carlton was trying to escape, Cross already gone. But Margaret had planned for this. Federal agents breached the mine's exits, trapping everyone inside. The shooting intensified, then gradually died away. When silence fell, Margaret finally let Lucy look. The chamber was littered with bodies. Carlton lay wounded, Blackwood standing over him with a gun. "It's over," the marshal said, but Margaret knew better. Men like Cross didn't give up easily. The war for Dead Creek's soul was just beginning, and she had chosen her side. Margaret approached Carlton as Blackwood kept him covered. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, but his eyes still burned with hatred. "You've destroyed everything," he spat. "Years of work, connections, power, all gone because of one interfering nun." "No." Margaret knelt beside him. It's gone because you chose greed over humanity. Now, tell me about Cross. Where would he go? Carlton laughed, then coughed wetly. You think this ends with me? Cross has friends in places you can't imagine. Governors, senators, industrial titans. They all use our services. The trafficking, Margaret pressed. How many children? Wouldn't you like to know? His eyes flicked to Lucy. Sweet child. Just like her mother before she got too curious, before she found the ledgers about our special cargo. Margaret's hand shot out, gripping his wounded side. Carlton screamed. Sister, Blackwood warned. Not now, Marshal. She leaned closer to Carlton. Lucy deserves to know. Her mother deserves justice. Justice? Carlton wheezed. There's no justice, only power, and those too weak to seize it. Ask your precious British intelligence about justice. Ask them about Shanghai in '95. Margaret's blood ran cold. Shanghai, another operation buried in agency files. Another time she discovered her superiors caring more about political convenience than human lives. Marshal, Mills called from the chamber entrance. Found something you should see. In a small office off the main chamber, they discovered detailed maps and documents. Railroad routes, schedules, lists of children from mining families who had disappeared over the years. It's bigger than we thought, Blackwood said grimly. They're using the entire railway network. Mining towns are just collection points. And Dead Creek was one hub of many, Margaret added. Carlton's ledger only shows part of the operation. Lucy stood in the doorway, her young face set with determination. I remember some of them. Children who stopped coming to school. Father said their families moved away, but Margaret pulled her close. It wasn't your fault, Lucy, but you can help us save others. How? By being brave. By telling Marshal Blackwood everything you saw and heard in your father's house. Name every detail. Blackwood nodded. We'll need to move her somewhere safe. Cross won't stop hunting for her. I won't run, Lucy declared. Mother didn't run and neither will I. No, Margaret agreed. We won't run, but we'll be smart. She turned to Mills. Sheriff, how many mining towns are within a day's ride? 4 or 5, all connected by rail, and all potential trafficking points. Margaret's mind raced with possibilities. We can use that. Let Cross think we're evacuating Lucy by train. Meanwhile, we stay and fight, Lucy finished. With respect, sister, Blackwood interjected, you're talking about using a child as bait. I'm talking about giving Lucy a choice, the same choice I never had. Margaret met the girl's eyes. When I was your age, others decided my fate, made me into what they needed. You deserve better. Lucy squared her shoulders. I want to help, for Mother, for the other children. A commotion outside interrupted them. One of Blackwood's agents burst in. Marshal, telegram from Denver. Cross was spotted boarding a train east, but... He hesitated, but what? Sir, he wasn't alone. A British diplomatic courier was with him. They had official papers. Margaret cursed softly. He's using diplomatic channels to move, just like Guillaume did. Can your agency stop him? Mills asked Blackwood. Officially. No, not without causing an international incident. Then it's good I stopped being official 3 years ago. Margaret checked her weapons. Lucy, I need you to stay with Sheriff Mills. Marshal, your men should focus on securing evidence here. I'm going after Cross. Alone, Blackwood demanded. That's suicide. No, Lucy spoke up. Not alone. She retrieved something from the office desk, her father's ledger. Take this. Show everyone what they did. Margaret accepted the ledger solemnly. I'll come back, I promise. I know, Lucy smiled. God protects his children, remember? And sometimes, Margaret touched her cross, feeling the hidden blade within. He sends someone to help with the protection. As she prepared to leave, Mills pulled her aside. Sister, Catherine, whatever happens, dead. Creek's better for having known you. Take care of her, Sheriff. And if I don't return, we'll keep her safe, but come back anyway. School needs its teacher." Margaret smiled, then turned to Blackwood. "Marshal, I'll need transportation, and anything you can tell me about Cross's diplomatic contacts. This goes against every protocol. Then it's good I don't answer to protocols anymore." She checked her hidden blades one last time. "I answer to a higher authority now," Blackwood sighed. "God help us all." "Oh, he will," Margaret assured him. "He sent me, didn't he?" As she rode out of Dead Creek, Margaret felt the familiar ice of mission focus settling over her. But this time was different. This wasn't about Queen and country, or even personal redemption. This was about justice, about protecting the innocent, about finishing what began in Paris 3 years ago. Cross would learn that some sins can't be hidden behind diplomatic papers, and some nuns carry more than just prayers in their arsenal. The war for Dead Creek's soul might be won, but the larger battle was just beginning. And Margaret intended to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The Denver-bound train cut through the Montana night like a steel serpent. Margaret stood in the shadows between carriages, her nun's habit replaced by practical dark clothing. 3 cars ahead, Victor Cross traveled in diplomatic comfort, believing himself untouchable. She'd caught up to the train outside of Millbrook Station, using skills honed through years of fieldwork to board undetected. Now she waited, watching the guards' patrol patterns through the windows. 2 men outside Cross's private car, professionals by their stance. Another inside, probably more in adjacent cars. The diplomatic courier would be there too, either a willing accomplice or an unwitting pawn. A sudden lurch sent her hand to the railing. The track curved through mountain passes here, offering both challenge and opportunity. She'd memorized the route from Mill's maps. In 20 minutes they'd hit Serpent's Gap. 5 minutes of darkness. Through a tunnel. Her best chance to move. Voices drifted from the passenger car behind her. "British woman, dangerous, diplomatic immunity, no jurisdiction." "Kill her on sight," Margaret smiled grimly. At least they were taking her seriously. She checked her weapons one final time. The weighted rosary hung at her belt, a reminder of promises made. Carlton's ledger was secured inside her jacket, its pages heavy with damning evidence. Various blades nestled in familiar hiding spots, and a garrote wire was coiled in her sleeve. The mountain walls grew steeper, almost time. A memory surfaced, her last conversation with Lucy before leaving. "Dead Creek, will you kill him?" the girl had asked. "Like you killed Father's men?" "If necessary," Margaret had answered honestly. "But first, I'll make him face justice. Mother used to say justice was God's work. Then perhaps that's why he led me here." The train's whistle pierced the night, warning of the approaching tunnel. Margaret moved. As darkness swallowed the train, she was already in motion, using the rhythmic sway to mask her footsteps. The first guard died silently, garrote wire ending his watch. The second had time for a muffled gasp before a blade found his throat. Professional. Courtesy. Quick, clean deaths for professionals. Light flooded back as they exited the tunnel. Margaret pressed against the car's wall, counting heartbeats. No alarm raised. Through the window she saw Cross at a small table, studying papers. The diplomatic courier sat opposite him, young and nervous-looking. The door lock yielded to practiced fingers. Margaret slipped inside, blade ready. "Good evening, Mr. Cross." He looked up calmly. "Sister Margaret. Or is it Agent Spencer now? I'm afraid I can't keep track. Names change, sins don't." The courier reached for a hidden weapon. Margaret's thrown blade pinned his sleeve to the table. "Please don't," she advised. "This can end cleanly." Cross sighed. "Nothing about this business is clean, Agent Spencer. You, of all people, should understand that. Shanghai taught us both that lesson, didn't it? Shanghai was a bloodbath because men like you put profit above lives. Shanghai was necessary, just like Paris, just like Dead Creek. The world runs on secrets and shadows, Agent Spencer. Children disappear, fortunes change hands, and empires maintain their grip through carefully managed darkness. Margaret moved. Closer, another blade appearing in her hand. Pretty words to justify ugly deeds, says the woman who broke a banker's neck in Paris. Cross smiled thinly. How many have you killed, Agent Spencer? How many deaths hide behind that cross you wear? Enough to recognize evil when I see it. Carlton's ledger tells an interesting story, one that will interest a lot of powerful people. That ledger is diplomatic property now. He gestured to his papers, covered by international law. Law? Margaret laughed softly. Did the law protect Lucy's mother? The children in your mines? No, Mr. Cross. You stopped being protected by law when you chose to traffic innocent lives. The courier finally found his voice. This is an outrage. I'll report. Margaret's blade pressed against his throat. Report what? That you're helping transport evidence of child trafficking, that your diplomatic pouch contains proof of murder. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I didn't know. Of course you did. The money was too good to ask questions. Cross clapped slowly. Very good, sister. But what's your play here? Kill us both? That would cause an international incident, the very thing your former masters want to avoid. You assume I care about diplomatic fallout? No, he studied her face. You care about justice now. Your God has given you a mission. His hand moved slowly to his jacket. But God isn't here on this train. Margaret tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, Cross withdrew a photograph. Lucy Carlton, such a bright child. It would be a shame if something happened to her while you're pursuing your righteous crusade. Ice filled Margaret's veins. She's protected. No one is protected. Not really. Carlton had friends in Dead Creek, loyal friends, all waiting for a signal. You're bluffing, am I? He produced a telegram, sent an hour ago. If I don't countermand it by dawn, well, he shrugged. Children disappear all the time in mining towns. Margaret's blade pressed harder against the courier's throat. A drop of blood appeared. Kill him, the courier squeaked. He's admitted to trafficking. Shut up, both Margaret and Cross said simultaneously. Margaret's mind raced through options. The ledger contained enough evidence to destroy Cross's operation. But Lucy's life was worth more than justice. Tick-tock, sister, Cross smiled. Dawn approaches. What matters more, your mission or one child's life? You made a mistake in my mission, Margaret said softly. I'm not here for justice alone. Her blade flashed. The courier screamed, but it was Cross who fell, a second hidden blade buried in his chest. I'm here for vengeance too. As Cross clutched his wound, Margaret quickly bound the courier. Listen carefully, she told him. That telegram, where would it have been sent from? Denver Central Office, he gasped. All diplomatic communications. Good. She turned to Cross. Now you're going to help me save Lucy's life. Consider it your final confession. Cross coughed blood. Kill me and she dies. No. Margaret pressed on his wound. You'll live long enough to send a new telegram. Then you'll face earthly justice before meeting your maker. You think this ends with me? He laughed wetly. The operation is bigger than one man. I'm counting on it. She began bandaging his wound. You're going to help me destroy it all. Names, contacts, every piece of your empire. Consider it a penance. And why would I do that? Margaret smiled coldly. Because, unlike Paris, I'm not going to kill you quickly. You'll live to face every parent whose child you stole, every life you destroyed. God may forgive you eventually. They won't. Hours later, as dawn painted the Denver sky in shades of blood, Margaret watched federal agents lead Cross away. The courier had proved useful, his diplomatic papers helping to secure cooperation from local authorities. She sent 2 telegrams, one to Sheriff Mills, warning of potential threats to Lucy, the second to Marshal Blackwood, containing information Cross had revealed about his operation's extent. The war wasn't over. Men like Cross had powerful friends, but she'd struck a mighty blow. As she turned to leave, Cross called out, "He'll come for you now, the Spider. Shanghai wasn't just about trafficking. He owns us all." Margaret didn't look back. Let the Spider come. She had God's work to do, and her blades were sharp. She had a train to catch. Dead Creek's children were waiting for their teacher, and Sister Margaret had so much left to teach them about justice. The Denver street lamps cast long shadows as Margaret made her way to the telegraph office. Her wounds from the train needed attention, but they could wait. First, she needed to ensure Lucy's safety. The operator was dozing when she entered. "Urgent telegram to Dead Creek," she announced, sliding over a paper. The man blinked awake, then paled at the official seal Cross had surrendered. As the message went out, Margaret detected movement outside. 3 men trying too hard to look casual. She'd expected this. Cross's allies wouldn't let her leave Denver easily. "Stay inside," she told the operator. "Lock the door." She slipped out the back, into the warren of alleyways. The men followed, their footsteps echoing on cobblestones. Professionals again, but not as skilled as they thought. The first one died wondering where she'd gone. The second managed to draw his gun before her Garrett found his throat. The third proved more challenging. "The Spider sends his regards," he growled, blocking her blade with a fighter's instinct. His accent was Chinese, Shanghai trained. "Still hiring street thugs, I see," Margaret replied, recognizing the combat style. "Tell your master he should have killed me in Shanghai when he had the chance. He looks forward to correcting that mistake." They traded blows in the darkness, each seeking weakness. He was good, one of the Spider's personal assassins. But Margaret had learned new tricks since Shanghai. Her rosary caught his wrist, the weighted beads shattering bone. As he stumbled, her blade found his heart, but not before his own knife scored her side. "The Spider!" he gasped. "He knows about the girl." Margaret left him dying in the alley. She needed to move faster now. The Spider's involvement changed everything. Dawn found her at Denver's Catholic mission, where an old friend waited. "You look terrible," Sister Catherine said, leading her to a private room. The older nun had helped Margaret disappear after Paris, no questions asked. "I need information," Margaret said, as Catherine cleaned her wounds. "The Spider, what do you know of his recent activities? Human trafficking, mainly, using the chaos of frontier expansion as cover. Your British intelligence friends have been watching him, but they won't move without proof." Margaret winced as the needle went in. "Same story as Paris." "There's more." Catherine's voice dropped. "He's been seen with politicians, railroad barons. Some say he's building something bigger than his Shanghai empire, using children as leverage, among other things." Catherine finished the stitches. "The mission networks hear things. Children vanishing from mining towns, reappearing in San Francisco, New York, even London." Margaret's fists clenched. "He's going international. With help. Your Mr. Cross was just a middle manager. The real power lies with his American partners. Names: Senator Howard Blake, railroad magnate Theodore Whitmore, and..." Catherine hesitated. "Who?" "Judge Martin Wells. He's been assigning guardianship of orphaned children to the Spider's shell companies." Margaret absorbed this. A senator, a railroad empire, and corrupt judiciary. The Spider had built quite a web. "I need to get back to Dead Creek," she said, standing despite the pain. "Lucy is safer than you think." Catherine smiled. "Your Marshal Blackwood sent men to protect her, and I've arranged something special." She handed Margaret a document. "Official orders transferring Sister Margaret to a teaching position at Dead Creek's church, signed by the Archbishop himself." "Catherine, this is insurance. Even the Spider won't risk moving openly against the church." She pressed a small key into Margaret's hand. "The mission in San Francisco will help, when you're ready to strike." Margaret hugged her old friend. "Thank you. Just remember your true mission," Catherine said softly. "Justice without mercy is just revenge, and mercy without justice is surrender to evil." Catherine crossed herself. "Go with God, Sister Margaret, and maybe pack extra knives." An hour later, Margaret boarded a westbound train. Her habit was clean, her wounds bandaged, and Carlton's ledger secured. But her mind churned with new information. The spider was coming, not just for her, but for everything she protected. Dead Creek was just the beginning. She touched her cross, feeling the hidden blade within. Let him come. This time, she had more than queen and country to fight for. She had faith. She had a purpose, and Sister Margaret had a class full of children to teach about good and evil. The war for Dead Creek's soul was about to become something much bigger. But first, she had a spider to hunt. Dead Creek had changed in the week of Margaret's absence. Federal marshals patrolled the streets, and the bank remained sealed with crime scene tape. But it was the quiet that struck her most, the wary silence of a town that had glimpsed the darkness beneath its surface. Lucy waited at the schoolhouse with Sheriff Mills, her face lighting up at Margaret's return. "Sister, did you catch the bad men?" "Some of them," Margaret answered, noting the armed deputies positioned around the building. "Sheriff, a word." Mills followed her into the classroom while Lucy worked on her studies. "Marshal Blackwood's men found 3 more hidden chambers in the mines," he reported quietly. "Documents, shipping manifestos. Carlton's operation went deeper than we thought." "The spider's influence," Margaret nodded. "He's been building a network across the frontier. Dead Creek was just one piece." "The spider," Mills frowned. "Cross mentioned that name before they took him away. A ghost from my past. Shanghai's criminal emperor, now extending his reach to American soil." She showed Mills the documents Sister Catherine had provided. "He's got powerful allies. A senator, a railroad baron, even a federal judge." "Jesus," Mills whispered. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough that we'll need help." Margaret watched Lucy through the window. "The church has provided official cover for my presence here and connections that might prove useful." "Speaking of connections," Mills produced a telegram. "This came for you, no signature, but it bears a British intelligence seal." Margaret read it quickly, her expression hardening. "They're offering a deal. Full pardon, reinstatement if I hand over Carlton's ledger and walk away." "Will you?" "They're afraid," she mused. "The spider's operation threatens their own intelligence networks, but they won't move openly against him. Too much political risk. So they want you to disappear. Again. Along with the evidence." Margaret crumpled the telegram. "They'd bury it all just like Paris, just like Shanghai." A commotion outside drew their attention. 3 well-dressed men approached the schoolhouse, led by a striking figure in an expensive suit. Margaret recognized him from Sister Catherine's. "Intelligence. Theodore Whitmore, the railroad magnate." "Sheriff Mills," Whitmore called out. "A moment of your time?" Mills moved to intercept them, while Margaret watched from the shadows. The conversation was brief but heated. "Everything all right?" she asked when Mills returned. "Whitmore's buying up local mining claims. Says he's stabilizing the region after Carlton's arrest." Mills spat. "Offered to double the department's budget if we'll cooperate with his company's security forces, replacing Carlton's operation with his own. That's not all. Judge Wells arrives tomorrow for a special hearing. Something about reviewing custody arrangements for local orphans." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Lucy, my thoughts exactly." As her father's closest living relative, Whitmore's filing for guardianship. The pieces clicked into place. The spider was moving faster than expected, using legal means to continue Carlton's trafficking operation. Take the children legally, ship them through Whitmore's railroad network, all under the protection of a corrupt judge. "We need to move first," Margaret decided. "How many families lost children to Carlton's operation?" At least 15 in Dead Creek alone, more in surrounding towns. Get them together, tonight. The church will host a special prayer meeting. Mills caught her meaning. Witnesses and warriors. The spider's not the only one who can build a network. As Mills left, Lucy approached Margaret's desk. They're going to try to take me away, aren't they? No, Margaret said firmly. I made you a promise. No one will hurt you again. I'm not afraid, Lucy said. Mother taught me to be brave. Your mother taught you more than that. Margaret retrieved Carlton's ledger from her bag. She taught you to recognize evil, to fight it with truth. That's why she kept records. Like you do? I've seen you writing in your journal. Margaret smiled. Sometimes she forgot how observant children could be. Yes, because truth is our strongest weapon. But first we have lessons to complete. The afternoon passed in a blur of arithmetic and reading. Margaret watched her students carefully, noting which ones showed signs of fear or trauma. Carlton's operation had touched too many lives. As darkness fell, families began arriving at the church. Miners, shopkeepers, farmers, all with haunted eyes and missing children. Margaret had Mills position armed deputies discreetly while she prepared the evidence. Judge Wells' carriage arrived. As the meeting began, the magistrate stormed into the church, Whitmore close behind. This is highly irregular, Wells blustered. A court hearing is scheduled for— This isn't a hearing, Your Honor, Margaret interrupted. It's a confession. She nodded to Mills, who locked the doors. Then she began laying out documents. Carlton's ledger, shipping records, banking statements, and Sister Catherine's intelligence reports. The children you declared orphans? She addressed Wells. Their parents are here. The mining accidents that conveniently killed witnesses, the survivors are here. The money transfers through Carlton's bank, all documented. Whitmore stepped forward. You have no authority, but the church does. Margaret produced the Archbishop's orders, as do federal marshals, as do grieving parents demanding justice. You're interfering with forces beyond your comprehension, Whitmore warned. No, Mr. Whitmore, I comprehend perfectly. Shanghai taught me how men like you operate, how you build empires on stolen innocence. But this isn't Shanghai. She turned to the assembled families. Tell them about your missing children. Show them what justice looks like in Dead Creek. For hours, parents testified. Stories of disappeared children, of threats and bribes, of a system built to prey on the vulnerable. Wells wilted under the evidence. Whitmore maintained his composure. But Margaret saw the calculations behind his eyes. When the last parent finished, Margaret addressed the judge. Your Honor, you have a choice. Sign confessions detailing your role in this operation, or face these families in court. The spider can't protect you from this much truth. Wells broke first, agreeing to turn state's evidence. Whitmore remained defiant until Margaret produced one final document, a telegram from Shanghai. Your master sent assassins to Denver. She told him quietly. They failed. Now he knows I'm hunting him. How long before he decides you're a liability? The railroad baron's face went pale. Within the hour, both men were in custody, their signed confessions promising to shake the territory's power structure. But Margaret took no satisfaction in the victory, because as the families left the church, carrying hope for the first time in years, she spotted movement in the shadows, a figure watching from the cemetery. Asian features, expensive clothes, a dragon ring on one finger. The spider hadn't sent assassins to Denver, he'd come himself. The war for Dead Creek's children was won. But the real battle was just beginning, and this time the spider wouldn't underestimate a simple nun with a deadly past. Margaret touched her cross, feeling the familiar blade within. Time to finish what began in Shanghai. But first, she had a class to teach. After the church meeting, Margaret walked Lucy home through Dead Creek's darkened streets. The girl hadn't Spoken much since Whitmore's arrest, lost in thoughts too heavy for her years. You saw him, didn't you? Lucy finally asked. The man in the cemetery. Yes. No point lying to a child who'd learned to spot deception too young. He's the one father feared, the one they called the Spider. Margaret kept her hand near her concealed blade as they walked. How do you know that name? I heard things. When Mother was still, Lucy swallowed hard. He visited once. Father acted differently around him, scared. They reached the sheriff's house where Lucy was staying. Mills had transformed the place into a fortress, deputies watching from strategic positions. Lucy? Margaret knelt to meet the girl's eyes. What else do you remember about his visit? He gave Father a ring, like his, but smaller, said it meant our family was part of his web now. Lucy's voice dropped to a whisper. The night Mother died, she found the ring. She was going to show someone. Do you know where it is now? Lucy nodded. Hidden, in my old house. Mother put it somewhere safe. But then they came. Margaret absorbed this. Physical evidence linking Carlton to the Spider would be invaluable. Tomorrow's Sunday. No classes. Perhaps we should visit your old home. The marshal sealed it. Child, Margaret smiled slightly. Locks have never been much of an obstacle for me. Later that night, Margaret met with Mills and Blackwood in the church office. Maps covered a desk, marking known locations of the Spider's operation. Wells is talking, Blackwood reported. The trafficking network extends through most major railroad hubs. Children taken legally through corrupt courts, moved by Whitmore's trains, shipped overseas through San Francisco. And behind it all, the Spider builds his web, Margaret mused, using American expansion to create an empire larger than Shanghai ever was. But why show himself now? Mills wondered. A man that is powerful usually stays in the shadows. Because I changed the game in Paris. Margaret traced the railway lines on the map. His European operation collapsed when Guillaume died. Now his American network is threatened. He's here to salvage what he can. And deal with you personally, Blackwood added. Yes. Margaret touched her cross. Old debts come due. What happened in Shanghai? Mills asked. You never said. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I was young, idealistic. British intelligence sent me to investigate corruption in the international settlement. I discovered the Spider's operation, children disappearing from European families, sold to wealthy Chinese families or worse. But the agency wouldn't move against him, Blackwood guessed. Too many powerful people involved. They ordered me to observe and report only. Her voice hardened. I disobeyed. Freed some children, killed some of his men. The Spider himself gave me this scar. She traced the thin line along her collarbone. He let me live as a lesson in humility. His mistake. And now, he's here to correct it, Mills said. No, Margaret studied the map. He's here because Dead Creek is key to everything. The railway hub, the mines, the territorial government's corruption, it all centers here. Without Dead Creek, his entire network falters. So, we fortify the town, Blackwood suggested. Bring in more marshals. No, that's what he expects. Margaret stood. Tomorrow, Lucy and I will search her old house. There may be evidence her mother has hidden, proof linking the Spider directly to Carlton's operation. It's too dangerous. Mills protested. Let my deputies, the Spider's watching them, but a nun and a child visiting a dead woman's home, that he might not notice. And if he does? Blackwood asked quietly. Margaret's smile was cold. Then he'll learn what 3 years of prayer and penance have taught me about dealing with evil. After they left, Margaret knelt before the altar. Not to pray. She'd done enough of that. Instead, she mentally prepared for what was coming. The Spider wouldn't act openly, not yet. He'd watch, probe for weaknesses, try to isolate her. But eventually, they'd face each other again, and this time, one of them wouldn't walk away. She touched the scar he'd given her in Shanghai. Back then she'd fought for Queen and country, for abstract ideals of justice. Now she fought for Lucy, for Dead Creek's children, for a chance at redemption. The spider had built his web with corruption and fear. But Margaret had built something stronger: faith, truth, and the fierce love of a community fighting for its soul. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But tonight, Sister Margaret had lesson plans to prepare. After all, Monday's class would study David and Goliath. Some lessons, she reflected, were timeless. Dawn painted Dead Creek's main street in shades of gold as Margaret and Lucy approached. The Carlton house. The mansion stood silent, crime scene seals still marking the doors. But Margaret noticed subtle signs of disturbance: a boot print in the garden soil, a recently broken twig near the kitchen window. "Someone's been here," she murmured, drawing Lucy closer. "The spider's men? Likely, looking for the same thing we are." Margaret studied the house's facade. "Show me where your mother spent most of her time." Lucy led them to the back of the property, where a small greenhouse attached to the kitchen. She loved her flowers, said they were the only beautiful things in this house. Margaret examined the greenhouse's lock, noting fresh scratch marks. "Your mother was clever, hiding things where your father rarely looked." Inside, the greenhouse was a riot of neglected blooms and withering vines. Lucy moved purposefully to a workbench, her small fingers tracing patterns in the dust. "Mother taught me a game," she explained, "following clues in the flowers. I thought it was just for fun, but—" She reached beneath the bench, triggering a hidden catch. A small compartment opened. "Empty," Margaret noted. "Recently cleared. No, wait." Lucy pointed to faint scratches in the wood. Mother's special code. She used it in her diary. Margaret studied the marks. Simple but effective, a variation of a cipher she'd learned in training. "Can you read it?" Lucy nodded. "It says, 'Beneath the angel's tears.'" They found the stone. Angel in the garden's corner, its face weathered by years of Montana winters. At its base, mineral deposits had created streaks like tears on the carved cheeks. Margaret checked for watches before carefully lifting the statue. Beneath its base lay a small oilskin package. Inside, they found Carlton's ring, a silver band decorated with a delicate spiderweb pattern. With it was a letter written in Lucy's mother's hand. "Dear Lucy," Margaret read softly, "if you're reading this, then what I feared has happened. The ring is proof of your father's connection to—" Movement at the garden gate interrupted her. A well-dressed Chinese man stood watching them, a dragon ring glinting on his finger. "Miss Carlton," the spider said smoothly. "How you've grown." Margaret pushed Lucy behind her, blade sliding into her palm. "Run." Now, sister." The spider smiled. "Surely we can discuss this like civilized people." "There was nothing civilized about what you did in Shanghai. Ancient history. I'm here about the future." He gestured, and armed men emerged from the shadows. Dead Creek's future, specifically. Margaret counted 6 visible gunmen, probably more hidden. Bad odds, especially with Lucy to protect. "The town's under federal protection," she warned. "Yes, Marshal Blackwood's men. Currently responding to multiple emergencies across the territory. Unfortunately, how many things can go wrong on frontier railways?" Lucy's hand gripped Margaret's skirt. "Sister, it's all right," Margaret soothed. To the spider, "What do you want?" "The ring, the letter, Carlton's ledger, all evidence of my organization's American interests." He spread his hands reasonably. "In exchange, Dead Creek prospers. The children remain safe. And you, dear sister, get to keep playing teacher until the next shipment of orphans needs processing. Progress requires sacrifice. Surely your British masters taught you that." Margaret's mind raced through options, the gardener's shed behind. Them offered cover. Lucy knew the grounds better than the spider's men. "You're right," she said carefully. Progress does require sacrifice. In one motion, she flung her blade at the nearest gunman and shoved Lucy toward the shed. "Run!" Chaos erupted. Margaret's throw found its mark, dropping one man as she charged. Another. Lucy darted between rose bushes as bullets shattered greenhouse glass. Margaret fought with cold precision, each movement a deadly prayer. Two more men fell before she reached the shed's shelter, but the spider remained untouched, watching. "With clinical interest, your skills have improved," he called. "But your weakness remains the same." A scream pierced the morning. One of his men had caught Lucy. Margaret froze, bloody blade half raised. "Let her go!" "The evidence, sister. All of it." Lucy met Margaret's eyes and did something unexpected. She smiled. Then she drove her mother's gardening shears into her captor's thigh. Margaret didn't waste the opening. Her thrown blade took the wounded man in the throat as Lucy broke free. The spider's remaining men fired wildly, but the girl had already vanished into the garden's maze-like paths. "Impressive," the spider nodded. "You've taught her well." "I taught her to fight monsters." "No." His smile turned cruel. "Life taught her that. I merely profit from the lesson." More men were arriving. Margaret backed toward the greenhouse, buying time. Lucy would run for help, but the nearest deputies were minutes away. "Shanghai," the spider mused. "Paris, now Dead Creek. How many times? Must we dance this dance until you face justice?" "Justice?" He laughed softly. "Look around, sister. This is the frontier. Justice is whatever men like me say it is. The strong prey on the weak. The only variable is profit margin." Margaret's back hit the greenhouse wall. "There's always another way." "Yes. Death." He gestured to his men. "Take her. Alive, if possible. Dead, if necessary." The greenhouse exploded. Lucy had reached the house's gas main, just as Margaret had taught her. The explosion caught 3 gunmen in its blast, scattering the rest. Margaret used the chaos to close distance with the spider. His dragon ring sparked against her blade as he parried with a hidden sword stick. "You've corrupted that child," he said, their weapons locked. "Made her a killer." "No, you did that when you murdered her mother." They fought with lethal grace through the burning garden. Margaret drove him back, but the spider's skill matched hers. Neither could land a killing blow. Shouts announced the arrival of deputies. The spider disengaged smoothly. Another time, "Sister," he melted into the smoke, "give Lucy my regards." Margaret wanted to pursue, but Lucy's safety came first. She found the girl hiding exactly where they'd planned, the root cellar of an abandoned house nearby. "Did you get them?" Lucy asked. "The ring and letter?" Margaret produced the oilskin package, somehow preserved through the fight. "Your mother's. Last gift. Proof of everything." Lucy touched the package reverently. "Will it be enough? With Carlton's ledger and the other evidence?" "Yes." Margaret hugged her. "Your mother would be proud. She'd be proud of you too." Lucy looked up solemnly. "Will he be back?" "Yes, but we'll be ready." Later, as federal agents swarmed the burned garden, Margaret studied the letter's contents. With Blackwood and Mills, Lucy's mother had documented everything: dates, transactions, names of corrupt officials across 3 territories. "This goes higher than we thought," Blackwood said grimly. "Territorial governors, cabinet members." "The spider's true web," Margaret nodded. "Political power, not just criminal empire." "Can we stop it?" Mills asked. Margaret watched Lucy talking with the deputies, standing straight and unafraid despite the morning's violence. "We already have, 1 thread at a time." She touched her cross. "The spider thinks strength is about power over others, but true strength comes from protecting them," Lucy finished, joining them. "That's what you taught us, sister." Margaret smiled. The next battle was coming. The spider wouldn't stop until his empire was secure or destroyed. But looking at Lucy's determined face, she knew which outcome God intended. After all, even the craftiest spider could fall to an angel's tears. Nightfall brought an uneasy quiet to Dead Creek. Margaret sat in the church office, studying the spider's ring under lamplight. The web pattern contained microscopic engravings, names, dates, locations of his operations. "Another code?" Lucy asked from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket Mills had given her. "Your mother was brilliant," Margaret replied. "She didn't just hide the ring. She marked it, documenting every meeting your father had with the Spiders organization." Sheriff Mills entered, his expression grave. 3 more federal marshals were found dead along the railroad. Spider's cleaning house. "No," Margaret corrected. "He's isolating Dead Creek, cutting off our support before he moves." The town's talking, scared. That explosion at Carlton Place has everyone on edge. Lucy straightened. "Let them talk. We're not afraid." Margaret studied the girl who'd shown such courage that morning. "No, we're not. But we need to be smart." She spread a map across her desk. "The Spider's men will watch all official routes. Into town, we need another way to get messages out." "The mining tunnels," Lucy suggested. "They connect to other towns. Father used them for moving things secretly." "Good thinking." Margaret marked the tunnel routes. "Mills, which ones are still stable?" "Eastern Passage to Silver Creek, Northern Line to Fort Mason. But they'll be watching those too." "Not all of them." Margaret's finger traced a faint line. "This one, it's not on Carlton's maps." "Because it collapsed years ago," Mills said. "Did it? Or did Carlton just want everyone to think that?" Lucy's eyes widened. "The closed tunnel where Mother used to meet someone. I remember hearing her talk about it." "A secret route," Margaret nodded. "Probably how she got information to federal investigators." "Mills, we need to—" Gunfire erupted outside. The Spider's men were tired of waiting. "Get Lucy to the cellar," Margaret ordered, reaching for her weapons. "Use the tunnel passage we prepared." "I want to help," Lucy protested. "You help by staying safe." Margaret hugged her quickly. "Remember what I taught you about faith." "It's strongest when tested," Lucy recited. "Good girl. Go with the sheriff. I'll handle our visitors." As Mills led Lucy away, Margaret moved through the darkened church. Bullets splintered windows as shadows approached through the cemetery. She counted movements, 12 men spreading out to surround the building. Professional work, but they didn't know about the preparations she'd made after morning's attack. The first man to breach the side door triggered a tripwire. Margaret's weighted rosary, strategically placed, crushed his throat. His partner died wondering where the blade came from. She moved like a ghost through familiar shadows, prayer and violence, becoming one deadly dance. The Spider had taught his men well, but Margaret had learned new skills, serving a different master. 4 more fell before they realized their danger. The survivors pulled back, regrouping behind gravestones. "The girl's all we want," a voice called. "The Spider's offering mercy, sister. One last time." Margaret's answer was a thrown blade that silenced him forever. The remaining men rushed the church together, thinking numbers would prevail. They found Margaret waiting in the confession booth. Turns out confessing sins was easier when they were your enemy's final words. When silence fell again, she retrieved her weapons from the dead. The Spider would send more, but this night's message was clear. Dead Creek's children were under God's protection, and his servants' blades were sharp. She found Mills and Lucy in the tunnel beneath the church, along with something unexpected, a hidden room filled with documents. "Mother's sanctuary," Lucy whispered, "where she kept her real records." Margaret examined the papers quickly. Names of corrupt officials, transportation routes, banking records. Everything needed to destroy the Spider's entire operation. Your mother wasn't just gathering evidence, she realized. She was building a case, a legal way to end this. "Can we finish her work?" Lucy asked. Margaret shared a look with Mills. The Spider wouldn't stop. More men would come. But with these documents, yes, she decided, we'll finish it for your mother, for all the children. How? By teaching the spider a lesson about underestimating women of faith. She began sorting documents, forming a plan. The next battle was coming, but this time they had God's evidence on their side, and Sister Margaret had some very special lessons to prepare. Dawn broke over Dead Creek as Margaret finished encrypting her telegrams. Each message contained a piece of Lucy's mother's evidence, carefully coded and addressed to different newspaper editors across the territory. The spider might controlled politicians and lawmen, but the power of the press was harder to silence. "Will they publish it?" Lucy asked, helping Margaret seal the envelopes. "Some will try to bury it," Margaret admitted, "but your mother was clever. She kept copies, sent them to multiple sources. Once the story breaks, the spider can't stop it all." "Exactly." Margaret checked her hidden blade, more from habit than necessity. Truth, like faith, grows stronger when tested. Sheriff Mills arrived as they finished, his expression troubled. 3 more reporters found dead in Denver, spiders trying to control the narrative. "He's scared," Margaret noted. "For the first time, he's not controlling all the pieces on the board. There's more. Judge Wells was found in his cell this morning. Killed himself, supposedly. Suicide?" Lucy's voice was skeptical. "Like mother's accident?" "The spider ties up loose ends," Margaret said grimly. "Wells knew too much, like Whitmore will, unless—" She moved to the church window, studying the street outside. Dead Creek had transformed into an armed camp, deputies and federal agents patrolling in force, but she knew the real threat wouldn't come from outside. "The spider's already here," she said softly. "Watching, waiting. He'll want to finish this personally. Then let's finish it on our terms." Mills spread a map across her desk. "Whitmore's being transported to the territorial prison tomorrow. Spider's men will try to silence him on the road." "No." Margaret traced the rail lines with her finger. "That's too obvious. The spider thinks like a chess master, always 3 moves ahead. He'll expect us to protect the obvious route." Lucy studied the map intently. "The old tunnel, the one Mother used. Where does it really lead?" Margaret smiled. The girl was learning to think strategically. According to these documents, it connects to Whitmore's private rail line, the one he used for special shipments. "A trap?" Mills suggested. "Better. A chance to catch the spider in his own web." She turned to Lucy. "But I'll need your help. One last time." The girl straightened. "What do we do?" Margaret laid out her plan. It was audacious, perhaps reckless, but sometimes faith required a leap into darkness. That afternoon, word spread through Dead Creek that federal marshals would transport Whitmore at dawn. Margaret made sure the spider's watchers saw the preparations, the armed escorts assembling, but in the gathering darkness, other pieces moved quietly into place. Lucy led a group of trusted deputies through the hidden tunnel, showing them the route her mother had mapped. Margaret prepared the old mining chamber, transforming it into something else entirely, like the catacombs beneath Rome, she explained to Lucy, where early Christians hid from persecution. Faith adapts, survives, learned to fight back. By midnight, everything was ready. Margaret knelt in the church, not to pray, but to center herself for what was coming. "Sister," Lucy's voice was small in the darkness, "what if he doesn't come?" "He'll come. Men like the spider can't resist playing their own game." Margaret touched her cross. "That's why they ultimately fail. Pride blinds them to simple truths." "What truths?" "That real strength comes from protecting others. That evil, no matter how powerful, cannot overcome good forever." She smiled slightly. "And that sometimes the deadliest weapon is a simple nun with a righteous cause." Movement outside caught her attention. A figure in the cemetery, one of the spider's men, but making no effort to hide. "An invitation," Margaret murmured. "A trap," Mills countered, emerging from the shadows. "Of course, but traps work both ways." She turned to Lucy. "Remember your part?" The girl nodded solemnly. "Mother would be proud of both of us." Margaret hugged her quickly, then moved to the church door. "Mills, get everyone in position. When the spider makes his move, we'll be ready." She stepped into the night, blade concealed but ready. The spider's man led her through Dead Creek's empty streets, past shuttered buildings and watchful shadows. They reached Whitmore's private rail depot, a fortress-like structure connected to the hidden tunnel network. Perfect for moving secret cargo, perfect for an ambush. Inside, the spider waited with a dozen men, but Margaret's attention was fixed on his companion. "Hello, Father," Lucy said calmly. Carlton stood beside the spider, his injured hand bandaged, but his face twisted with hate. "You've corrupted my daughter, turned her against her own blood." "No," Margaret replied. "You did that yourself. When you choose profit over love, power over justice." "Justice," the spider laughed softly. "An interesting word, coming from a British agent who abandoned her post, who betrayed her own masters. I serve a higher authority now." "Ah, yes, your newfound faith." He gestured to their surroundings. "Tell me, sister, does your God approve of all the death you've dealt, the lives you've taken in his name?" "God forgives much." Margaret's hand touched her cross. "But harming children? That requires a special kind of penance." "Enough philosophy." Carlton stepped forward. "Where's the evidence? My wife's documents?" "Safe, beyond your reach." "Nothing is beyond our reach," the spider said calmly. "Not here, not in this territory. By dawn, your newspapers will be silenced. Your witnesses are eliminated. Your precious church burned with all its secrets." He produced a familiar journal. "Including this, I think, found in your private quarters. Most enlightening reading. Margaret's coded intelligence reports. She'd known they'd search the church eventually, prepared for it." "Then you know what's coming," she said. "How this ends." "Indeed." The spider's smile was cold. "With a tragic accident, a desperate nun, driven mad by trauma, killing an innocent girl before taking her own life. Very sad. Very final." Lucy's eyes widened. "Father, you wouldn't—" "You're my daughter," Carlton snarled. "Mine to deal with as I choose." "No!" Lucy's voice hardened. "I'm my mother's daughter, and she taught me about choices." The girl pulled something from her dress. Her mother's ring, the one with the spider's mark. But it had been modified. The hollow center now filled with something else. "Mother also taught me about chemistry," Lucy said. "About gases in the mines, about how to survive them." She threw the ring down hard. Gas erupted as the sealed chamber cracked. Margaret moved instantly, blade finding the nearest gunman's throat. Lucy ducked behind mining equipment as planned. The spider's men, caught by surprise, fired blindly into the spreading gas. But Margaret had prepared for this. Her hidden allies wore masks, emerging from concealed positions with deadly purpose. The spider himself melted away as chaos erupted, leaving Carlton to his fate. The corrupt banker tried to reach Lucy, but Margaret intercepted him. "Your choice," she said, blade pressed to his throat. "Surrender or die. But you'll never touch her again." Carlton's eyes darted to his daughter. In that moment, perhaps, he saw what he'd lost, what he'd traded for power and wealth. "Lucy," he began. "Goodbye, Father," she said softly. He broke, falling to his knees as federal agents swarmed the chamber. But Margaret was already moving, pursuing the spider's retreat. She found him in the tunnel network, sword stick drawn. "Shanghai," he said conversationally. "Paris, now here. We seem destined to dance this dance. Then let's finish it." They fought through the darkness, blade against blade, skill against skill. But Margaret had changed since Shanghai. Her movements were no longer just about violence and death. They were prayers, acts of justice, protection for the innocent. The spider was fast, deadly. But faith, it seemed, was faster. When it ended, he lay bleeding, her blade at his throat. "Do it," he gasped. "Complete your revenge." "No." Margaret stepped back. Justice, not vengeance. You'll face the courts, the press, the truth. She retrieved Lucy's mother's documents from where he'd hidden them. Your empire ends here, she told him, not with violence, but with light shining on darkness. Dawn found them back in the church, Lucy safely tucked against Margaret's side as federal agents led the prisoners away. The spider's web was unraveling, his allies falling one by one as evidence reached the press. "What happens now?" Lucy asked. "Margaret, watch the sun rise over Dead Creek. Now, we have lessons to prepare and hope to rebuild. Will they come after us again? Perhaps. Evil never truly rests," Margaret smiled, "but neither does faith or justice or love." She touched her cross, feeling the blade within. A weapon, yes, but also a symbol of something stronger than any spider's web, the power of truth, of protection, of redemption. "Come," she said. "School begins soon, and we have so much left to learn." The aftermath of the battle brought new challenges. Margaret tended to her wounds in the church office while Lucy sorted through her mother's remaining documents. "There's something else here," Lucy said, holding up a leather-bound journal. "Names I don't recognize, important people." "Your mother's insurance," Margaret explained, examining a deep cut on her arm. "Protection against the spider's political allies." The journal detailed meetings, dates, and transactions involving territorial officials. Governors, judges, even a senator, all profiting from the spider's operation. A knock interrupted them. Marshal Blackwood entered, looking troubled. "The spider's talking," he reported. "Claims he has evidence implicating British intelligence. Says they knew about the trafficking and chose to look the other way." "Of course they did." Margaret's voice was bitter. "Empire requires compromise, or so they claimed, even if the price is children's lives." "What will you do?" "What the agency should have done in Shanghai." She took the journal from Lucy. "Expose everything, every name, every crime. Let justice work in the light." "They'll come for you," Blackwood warned. "Your former masters won't appreciate the embarrassment." "Let them come. Dead Creek has taught me something about standing ground." Lucy touched Margaret's cross. "Will you have to leave?" "No, child. My place is here now, teaching, protecting." She smiled slightly. "Though perhaps some lessons will be unconventional." Later that night, Margaret wrote in her own journal, documenting the day's events in her familiar code. Spider captured, network exposed. But the real victory belongs to a child's courage and a mother's truth. Lucy shows remarkable strength. Perhaps God's hand guides her path as it does mine. She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Shanghai's ghosts are finally laid to rest. The agency's betrayal there led me to this path, from Queen's servant to God's warrior. A better calling, I think. Here in Dead Creek, justice wears a simpler face, protection of the innocent, prayer and blade in service of truth." A sound at the door made her look up. Lucy stood there, nightgown-clad but sleepless. "Bad dreams?" Margaret asked. "No, good ones, actually." Lucy sat beside her. "I saw Mother. She was smiling. She has reason to. You finished her work, brought truth to light. We did it together." Lucy studied Margaret's face. "Will you teach me everything you know?" Margaret considered the request. The girl had shown remarkable aptitude for investigation, for strategy, for standing against evil. But she deserved a choice, not the path Margaret had been given. "I'll teach you to protect yourself," she decided, "to recognize truth from lies, to help others find justice." She touched her cross. "The rest will be your choice. Each soul finds its own way to serve." Lucy nodded solemnly. "Like you did, becoming something new." "Yes, though perhaps I was always meant for this, faith and protection, blade and prayer." Through the window, Dead Creek slept peacefully. The spider's web was broken, his allies falling as evidence spread. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, political battles, agency repercussions, souls needing guidance. But tonight, at this moment, Margaret felt true peace. She had found her calling, her redemption, her home. "Come," she told Lucy. "Time for rest. Tomorrow's lesson is about David and Goliath, the little one defeating the giant. Yes, and about having faith in justice, even against impossible odds." As they walked through the quiet church, Margaret touched her hidden blade one last time. A weapon, yes, but also a reminder. Evil never truly dies, but neither does hope, or faith, or love. And Sister Margaret would be ready, teaching both lessons to the next generation. A week after the spider's capture, Margaret stood before her class, teaching arithmetic, but her real attention focused on the men watching through. The schoolhouse windows, British intelligence agents poorly disguised as railroad workers. "Sister," Lucy whispered, "they're back again." "Let them watch," Margaret replied, writing another equation on the board. "We have nothing to hide." But that wasn't entirely true. Hidden in the church's vault lay copies of every document, every piece of evidence linking the spider's operation to British colonial interests, insurance against her former employer's inevitable interference. The classroom door opened, revealing Sheriff Mills. "Sister, got a moment?" Outside, Mills handed her a telegram. "From London. They're not happy about the newspaper stories. The past week had seen a flood of exposés across the territory. Lucy's mother's evidence, combined with the spider's confession, had implicated dozens of officials in both American and British governments. They want their agent back," Mills continued, "or their problem will be dealt with permanently." "I'm not their agent anymore." Margaret watched her students through the window. "And Dead Creek needs its teacher." "They won't stop." "No, but neither will I." She handed back the telegram. "Post extra deputies around the school, quietly." That evening, as Margaret prepared the next day's lessons, she received another visitor. Marshal Blackwood arrived with fresh intelligence. "Spider's political allies are mobilizing," he reported. "Senator Blake's called for a federal investigation into you, not him. Claims you're a foreign agent disrupting territorial affairs." And the trafficking evidence? Being challenged. Documents disappearing from evidence rooms. Witnesses changing testimonies. He grimaced. "Money talks." "Truth speaks louder." Margaret retrieved Lucy's mother's journal from its hiding place. "Send copies of these pages to every newspaper in the territory. Let's see them silence all of them. It won't be enough. They're painting you as a threat to national security." "No." Lucy's voice came from the doorway. She held up a stack of papers. "They're afraid of these." The papers were letters, dozens of them, from families across the territory. Parents whose children had vanished into the spider's network, each one a testimony, a cry for justice. Your mother's other insurance, Margaret realized. She wasn't just gathering evidence against the spider. She was building an army of witnesses. "People are coming," Lucy said, "to tell their stories, to stand with us." She was right. Over the next few days, families began arriving in Dead Creek. Miners, farmers, shopkeepers, all with tales of lost children and corrupted justice. The church filled with their testimonies. Margaret watched from her office as Mills organized the crowd. These weren't just witnesses anymore. They were a movement. "Your agency underestimates the power of truth," she told the watching agents, "or of a mother's love." But the opposition wasn't idle. That night, another attempt was made on the evidence. 3 men broke into the church vault, professional jobs sent by Margaret's former masters. They found her waiting. "Gentlemen," she said softly as they breached the vault door, "confession is good for the soul." The fight was brief but brutal. These weren't the spider's common thugs, but trained agents. They knew her techniques, her weaknesses. But they didn't know about her newfound faith. or the strength it gave her. When it ended, two lay unconscious. The third knelt before her, blade at his throat. "Hello, Morris," she said to her former handler, Catherine. He managed a pained smile. "Still dramatic as ever?" "Still following orders without questioning them. Someone has to maintain the empire." His eyes found her cross. "Though your new master seems to have taught you some new tricks." "Not tricks, truth." She lowered her blade. "Tell them, Morris. Tell London what's really happening here. How many children their precious empire has sacrificed." "They won't listen." "You know that? Then I'll make them hear." She helped him up. "Take a message back. Dead Creek is under my protection now. The next agents they send won't get off so easily." After he left, Lucy emerged from hiding. "There will be more." "Yes." Margaret began gathering documents. "Which is why we need to move faster. Your mother's witnesses, the letters, the spider's confession. Everything goes public tomorrow. They'll try to stop it." "Let them try." Margaret touched her cross. "Evil thrives in darkness, so we'll flood it with light." Dawn found them at Dead Creek's newspaper office. The editor, a former investigative reporter from Chicago, had been waiting for this moment. "Everything?" he asked, examining the files. "Everything," Margaret confirmed. "Every name, every crime, every child is stolen in the Empire's name." "They'll shut us down. Not before the truth spreads." She handed him copies of Lucy's mother's letters. The people deserve to know what was done in their name, and who stood against it. As the presses began to roll, Margaret watched the sun rise over Dead Creek. A year ago she'd been a fugitive, running from her past. Now she stood firmly in the light, faith and blade united in purpose. "Sister," Lucy touched her arm. "Riders coming." More agents approached the town, a small army of them. But they'd find more than one nun waiting. Dead Creek had awakened, its people standing ready to protect their own. "Get the papers distributed," Margaret told the editor. "No matter what happens." She stepped into the street, Lucy beside her. The girl had grown stronger, wiser in these past weeks, ready to face whatever came. "Are you afraid?" Lucy asked. "No." Margaret touched her cross, feeling the familiar blade within. "God's work continues, even against the Empire's will." The riders approached, weapons visible. But behind Margaret, Dead Creek's people emerged from their homes. Miners with pickaxes, farmers with rifles, mothers with fierce determination in their eyes. The Empire, it seemed, would face more than one nun's rebellion. And Sister Margaret had some very special lessons planned. The agents dismounted at Dead Creek's edge. Their leader, a man Margaret recognized from her London days, stepped forward. "Agent Spencer," he called. "Or do you prefer Sister now?" "What I prefer," Margaret replied, "is for the Empire to stop hunting children for profit." "You misunderstand. Our purpose, we're here to contain a diplomatic incident." "No." Lucy held up the morning's newspaper. "You're here because the truth hurts." More townspeople gathered. Sheriff Mills and his deputies took strategic positions. Marshal Blackwood's men emerged from side streets, rifles ready. "This can end peacefully," the British agent offered. "Return the documents, come home, all will be forgiven." "Forgiven?" Margaret's laugh was cold. "Like Shanghai was forgiven. Like Paris. Those operations were necessary, nothing about stealing. Children is necessary." She touched her cross. "But redemption, that's always possible." "Even for an empire?" Lucy asked softly. "Especially for the Empire." Margaret stepped forward. "Last chance. Leave Dead Creek. Let justice work in the light." Or learn why faith makes a better weapon than the Empire ever could." The agent studied the gathered crowd. Mothers who'd lost children, fathers with vengeance in their eyes, a town united against corruption. "London won't stop," he warned. "Neither will the truth." Margaret nodded to the newspaper editor, who began distributing papers to riders heading for other towns. "By nightfall, every territory will know the Empire's sins, And the consequences will fall on those who earned them. She met his eyes. Choose carefully, old friend. God forgives much, but harming children, that requires special penance. The agent considered his options. Violence would bring attention they couldn't afford. The story was already spreading. "Stand down," he ordered his men. To Margaret, "This isn't over." "No," she agreed. "It's just beginning." The agents rode away, leaving Dead Creek standing stronger, united, ready for whatever came next. Lucy took Margaret's hand. "Will we have class today?" "Of course," Margaret smiled. "Today's lesson is about David and Goliath and how sometimes the smallest stone can topple the mightiest giant. Like truth against empire?" "Exactly." She touched her cross one final time. "Now let's begin." Behind them, Dead Creek's people returned to their lives, changed but unbroken, protected by faith, truth, and one nun's deadly grace. The war wasn't over, but this battle at least belonged to justice, and Sister Margaret had more lessons to teach. The territorial governor's mansion loomed before Margaret, its windows glowing against the Montana dusk. Inside, the territory's power brokers gathered to deal with the crisis her revelations had sparked. "Are you sure about this?" Marshal Blackwood asked beside her. They watched from the shadows as carriages arrived. "The spider's web went deeper than we thought," Margaret replied. "These men didn't just profit from trafficking, they built their fortunes on it." Lucy sat in the carriage behind them, clutching her mother's final journal. "They're all here, everyone Mother wrote about." The guest list read like a who's who of territorial corruption. Senator Blake, Judge Reynolds, Railway Commissioner Thompson, all named in the evidence they'd exposed. "They'll try to bury it," Blackwood warned. "These men control every court in the territory. Then we'll take it beyond the courts." Margaret checked her hidden blade. "Lucy, the papers." The girl produced a stack of documents. Copies of everything they'd published, but with new additions. Bank records showing bribes, telegrams ordering murders, letters arranging shipments of special cargo. "Mother kept everything," Lucy said proudly. "Smart woman." Margaret touched her cross. Time to finish her work. They'd chosen this night carefully. The governor was hosting a gala celebrating the territory's economic growth. Every corrupt official who'd profited from the spider's network would attend. Perfect for Margaret's purpose. She wore an elegant dress instead of her habit, jewels concealing weapons. Lucy remained in the carriage with Blackwood, ready to signal Mills and his deputies if needed. "Remember," Margaret told them, "if anything goes wrong, we get the evidence to every newspaper in the territory." Lucy finished. "Make them face the truth." "Good girl," Margaret smiled. "Faith and justice, remember." "Faith and justice," Lucy echoed. The mansion's security was tight, but Margaret had been breaching such defenses for years. Within minutes, she was inside, moving through the crowd like a ghost. She spotted Senator Blake first, holding court near the champagne. The man responsible for blocking investigations into missing children, now sweating about newspaper headlines. "Quite a gathering," she said, approaching with 2 glasses. Blake's eyes narrowed. "Do I know you?" "We have mutual friends, in Shanghai, perhaps." His face paled slightly. "Sister Margaret, or whatever your real name is." "Names change, sins don't." She handed him a glass. "Though tonight's about redemption, isn't it? Is that what you call destroying good men's reputations?" "Good men?" Her laugh was soft. "Tell that to the parents of the children you helped traffic. Tell that to Lucy Carlton's mother." More officials gathered, drawn by their conversation. Margaret noted their positions, their nervous glances. These men had built empires on suffering. Now they faced justice from an unexpected quarter. "What do you want?" Blake demanded. "Confession." Margaret produced documents from her clutch. "Sign. These admit what you've done. All of you." Judge Reynolds scoffed. "Or what? You'll print more lies?" No lies, just Lucy Carlton's mother's final testimony. Every transaction, every child, every murder ordered to protect your profits. The men exchanged glances. Margaret saw, and calculations behind their eyes. Even if these documents exist, Railway Commissioner Thompson said carefully, accidents happen, evidence disappears. Try it, Margaret smiled coldly. By morning, every newspaper in America will have copies. Every federal marshal will have proof. Unless what? You confess. Now, face justice openly. She touched her cross. God forgives much. But harming children? That requires special penance. Blake reached for the documents, but his hand moved toward a hidden weapon instead. Margaret was faster. Her blade pressed against his ribs, hidden by their intimate pose. Careful, Senator. Wouldn't want to disturb the party. Outside, Lucy watched through binoculars. Something's wrong. More men are arriving. Blackwood checked his weapon. British intelligence? No. Lucy pointed to arriving carriages. Local muscle. They're going to try to silence everything tonight. Inside, Margaret felt the shift in atmosphere. Armed men filtering through the crowd. A trap closing. Last chance, she told Blake. Confession or consequences? You're outnumbered, he sneered. Even you can't fight them all. Who said anything? About fighting? Margaret nodded to the ceiling, where Lucy's signal lamp flashed from a nearby rooftop. Suddenly, the mansion's doors burst open. Parents whose children had vanished into the spider's network poured in. Miners, farmers, shopkeepers, all carrying copies of the evidence, all demanding justice. What is this? The governor spluttered. Democracy, Margaret said simply. The people you serve, demanding truth. Blake's men hesitated, faced with a crowd of witnesses. Any violence now would only confirm guilt. Sign, Margaret told the gathered officials. Or face them. Face every parent whose child you stole, every life you destroy for profit. One by one they broke. Confessions were signed, evidence acknowledged. By midnight, the territory's corruption lay bare. It won't bring them back, Lucy said later as they watched arrests being made. The lost children? No. Margaret held her close. But it gives them justice. Give their parents the truth. What happens now? Now? Margaret smiled. We have lessons to prepare, and more truth to teach. But as they returned to Dead Creek, Margaret knew this victory was just beginning. The spider's web had stretched far beyond one territory. Other children needed protection. Other truths needed light. She touched her cross, feeling the familiar blade within. God's work continued, and Sister Margaret had so much left to teach about justice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.